Jake Holbrook had seen a lot of weird things in his 47 years of ranching in Montana, but nothing quite prepared him for finding three glowing, chirping, definitely not from around here creatures huddled in his barn at 6 in the morning. "Well, ain't this just perfect?" he muttered, clutching his coffee mug like a lifeline. The meteor shower from the night before had been spectacular, sure, but he'd figured the worst consequence would be some spooked cattle. Not whatever the hell these things were. They looked like someone had crossed a miniature dragon with a disco ball. Each one was about the size of a house cat, covered in iridescent scales that shifted from deep purple to electric blue as they moved. Their wings were translucent and definitely not built for flying yet, judging by how they kept flopping around uselessly. And the sounds they made, good Lord, it was like someone had tuned a piccolo to the frequency of pure anxiety. "Shoo," Jake said half-heartedly, waving his hand. "Go on, get out of here. Find your own barn to do whatever it is you do." The creatures looked up at him with eyes that were way too intelligent for his comfort. Big, liquid gold eyes that seemed to be taking his measure. Then the smallest one, barely bigger than a kitten, limped forward on what appeared to be an injured leg and made a sound that was less musical chirp and more heartbroken whimper. "Oh, come on," Jake groaned. "Don't give me that look. I'm not running a charity here." But even as he said it, he was already crouching down, extending his hand slowly. The little one sniffed his fingers and then, with complete trust that made Jake's chest do something uncomfortable, climbed right into his palm. "You're hurt," he said, examining the creature's leg. It was definitely sprained, maybe worse. The other two were in similar shape, covered in what looked like minor burns and scratches. "What happened to you guys? Your folks leave you behind?" The creatures chirped in unison, a harmony that somehow conveyed both sadness and hope. Jake had been alone on this ranch for 3 years now, ever since Linda had decided that talking to cattle was not, in fact, a suitable replacement for human conversation, and had moved to Denver with her yoga instructor. He'd gotten used to the solitude, or at least that's what he told himself. But something about these little aliens, because that's what they had to be, made that familiar ache in his chest feel sharper. All right, he sighed, scooping up the other two with his free hand. "But just until you're healed up, understand? Then you find your way home." The creatures settled into his arms like they'd been waiting their whole lives for this moment. The smallest one, the one that had approached him first, made a soft trilling sound and pressed its tiny head against his thumb. "Yeah, well, don't get too comfortable," Jake muttered, but his voice had gone suspiciously soft. "I've got work to do, and I'm not about to let 3 space lizards turn me into some kind of alien babysitter." As he carried them toward the house, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a hard left turn into completely uncharted territory. And the worst part? He was already getting attached. 3 days later, Jake had learned several important facts about his unexpected house guests. First, they were incredibly smart. Second, they had the appetite of teenage boys. Third, they had absolutely zero understanding of the concept of personal space. No, he said, trying to extract the middle-sized one from his coffee mug. "That's not food, that's liquid motivation. Without it, I'm just a cranky old man with a barn full of aliens." The creature he'd started calling Wiz chittered apologetically and hopped onto his shoulder instead. Its claws were getting stronger, which was great for its recovery but terrible for Jake's shirts. He'd already gone through 2 flannels and was down to his emergency church clothes. "And you," he pointed at the largest one, Buzz, who was currently trying to eat his way through a bag of cattle feed. "That's not for you either. That's for creatures that weigh more than a sack of potatoes." Buzz looked at him with those liquid gold eyes and made a sound that Jake could swear was laughter. Then it went back to the feed bag. The smallest one, Pip, had claimed Jake's favorite armchair and was currently attempting to organize his TV remote controls by color. It had also figured out how to turn on the television, which had led to an awkward morning when Jake had walked in to find all 3 creatures absolutely mesmerized by a cooking show. "You know what," Jake said, collapsing into his remaining functional chair, "I give up. You want to redecorate? Fine. You want to watch Martha Stewart? Be my guest. Just don't break anything else. That's when Martha Kowalski knocked on his door. Martha was 83, had lived on the neighboring ranch for 60 years, and had a talent for showing up at the worst possible moments. Jake scrambled to hide the creatures, but Wiz was still on his shoulder, Buzz was too busy with the cattle feed to move, and Pip just stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Jake, dear, I brought you some of my famous pierogi, Martha called through the door. I know you've been moping around since Linda left, and a man needs proper food, not whatever frozen nonsense you've been living on. Just a minute, Martha, Jake called back, frantically trying to gather the creatures. I'm, not decent. Oh, please, Martha's voice was getting closer. I've seen you in your underwear before, remember? That time you fell in the creek chasing those escaped bulls. The door opened, and Martha walked in carrying a covered dish and wearing her best nosy neighbor expression. She took one look at the scene, Jake frozen mid-crouch with a space dragon in each hand and a third one on his shoulder, and set the pierogi down on the table. Well, she said calmly, that explains the strange lights I've been seeing over here. Martha, I can explain. They're adorable, she interrupted, walking over to get a better look. What are they, some kind of lizard? Where did you find them? Jake stared at her. You're not screaming. Dear, I lived through the 60s. This isn't even the weirdest thing I've seen this week. She reached out slowly and Pip immediately climbed onto her hand. Hello there, little one. Aren't you precious? Pip chirped happily and showed off by generating a small ball of light between its claws. Martha clapped in delight. Oh, that's wonderful. Jake, they're magical. They're aliens, Martha. From space. They crash-landed in my barn 3 days ago. Even better, Martha said, settling into Jake's chair with Pip in her lap. I always said this town needed more excitement. Now, what have you been feeding them? Everything, Jake said weakly. They've eaten half my vegetable garden and all my good coffee. Well, no wonder they're so active. You can't just give aliens whatever you have lying around. We need to do some proper research. And that's how Jake found himself with a co-conspirator in the most surreal situation of his life. Martha, it turned out, had a natural talent for alien care. She also had an extensive library of science fiction novels which she claimed were educational materials. By the end of the week, the creatures had learned to say Jake and Martha with surprising clarity. They'd also figured out how to open doors, operate light switches, and had somehow rewired Jake's television to pick up signals from what appeared to be 17 different galaxies. I don't suppose, Jake said, watching Buzz explain quantum physics to a very confused barn cat, this is going to stay our little secret forever. Martha patted his arm sympathetically. Oh, honey, you really have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, do you? The government showed up on a Tuesday, which Jake would later reflect was entirely typical of his luck. He'd been teaching the creatures how to play fetch, a game they'd taken to with disturbing enthusiasm and had somehow modified to include teleportation. Jake Holbrook? The woman at his door was wearing a black suit, sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and the kind of expression that suggested she ate small-town secrets for breakfast. I'm Agent Torres, Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. I'd like to ask you a few questions about unusual activity in this area. The Department of what now? Jake asked, trying to keep his voice casual while very aware that all three creatures were currently hiding in his kitchen pantry. Never heard of you. We're new, Agent Torres said dryly. Mind if I come in? Jake's mind raced. The creatures had gotten better at hiding, but they were still essentially overgrown toddlers with magical powers. Just yesterday, Pip had accidentally turned all his milk purple trying to help with breakfast. Actually, I was just heading out, Jake said. Cattle to check on, you know how it is. This will only take a minute. Agent Torres was already pushing past him into the house. We've detected some unusual energy signatures in this area. Radiation levels that don't match any known terrestrial sources. She paused in his living room, scanning the area with what looked like a modified smartphone. The device immediately started beeping frantically. Interesting, she murmured. Very interesting. From the kitchen came a soft crash, followed by a distinctly non-human giggle. Jake coughed loudly to cover the sound. That's just my cat, he said. Very clumsy cat. Always knocking things over. Must be quite a cat, Agent Torres said, moving toward the kitchen. These readings are off the charts. Jake's heart hammered as she approached the pantry. Inside, he could hear the creatures trying to stay quiet, which for them meant making sounds like a broken wind chime in a gentle breeze. Mr. Holbrook, Agent Torres said, reaching for the pantry door, I need you to know that harboring extraterrestrial life forms is a federal offense. I don't know what you're talking about, Jake said. But his voice cracked on the last word. Agent Torres opened the pantry door and found herself face to face with 3 very guilty-looking space dragons sitting on top of his canned goods. Buzz was holding a can of tomatoes. Wiz appeared to be wearing a colander as a hat. Pip was somehow hanging upside down from the top shelf. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Pip chirped hopefully and waved one tiny claw. Well, Agent Torres said slowly, that explains a lot. That's when Martha chose to walk in through the back door, carrying a plate of cookies and humming off key. Oh, hello, dear, she said to Agent Torres. Are you here about the aliens, too? Wonderful. I brought snacks. Jake buried his face in his hands. Martha, we talked about this. What? She's government, isn't she? They probably know all about it already. Martha turned to Agent Torres. Would you like some cookies? They're chocolate chip. The little ones love them. As if summoned by the mention of cookies, all 3 creatures abandoned their hiding spot and swarmed Martha, chirping excitedly. She laughed and started distributing treats while Agent Torres stood there looking like she'd stumbled into an alternate dimension. Ma'am, Agent Torres said carefully. How long have you known about them? Oh, about a week now, Martha said cheerfully. Jake found them in his barn after that meteor shower. They were just babies, all hurt and scared. He's been taking wonderful care of them. They're not pets, Agent Torres said. They're potentially dangerous extraterrestrial entities. Dangerous? Martha looked scandalized. These sweet little things? Pip here helped me reorganize my spice rack. Buzz fixed my television antenna. And Wiz has been teaching me about photosynthesis. They communicate with you? Of course they do. They're very intelligent. Watch this. Martha turned to the creatures. Children, say hello to the nice government lady. Hello, nice government lady. All 3 creatures chorused in perfect unison, their voices like crystal bells. Agent Torres sat down heavily in Jake's chair. I need to make some phone calls. Does this mean we're in trouble? Jake asked. Agent Torres looked at the creatures, who were now performing what appeared to be a coordinated dance routine for Martha's entertainment, and sighed. Mr. Holbrook, you have no idea how much trouble you're in. The ship arrived on a Thursday, which Jake was starting to think was the universe's way of telling him that weekdays were cursed. It appeared in the sky over his ranch like someone had dropped a small moon, all gleaming curves and impossible angles that hurt to look at directly. Well, Martha said, standing in his front yard with a cup of tea like watching alien motherships was part of her daily routine. I suppose that's their parents come calling. Jake was too busy hyperventilating to appreciate Martha's calm. The 3 creatures had been acting strange all morning, huddling together and making sounds like a symphony of wind chimes in a hurricane. Now they were pressed against the windows, their scales shifting through colors he was pretty sure didn't exist in any earthly spectrum. This is it, he wheezed. This is how I die. Death by alien invasion because I couldn't resist feeding 3 lost babies. Oh, hush, Martha said. If they wanted to kill us, they would have done it already. Look at the size of that thing. She had a point. The ship was easily the size of a football stadium, and it was just hanging there, not vaporizing anything or playing ominous music. In fact, it was rather beautiful, in a way that made Jake's brain hurt. Agent Torres chose that moment to screech up the driveway in a black SUV, followed by what appeared to be half the Montana National Guard. She jumped out, shouting into a radio while soldiers poured out of military vehicles. "Holbrook, we need to evacuate you immediately." "I'm not leaving them," Jake said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. The creatures had rushed to him when the chaos started, and were now clustered around his feet, looking up at him with complete trust. "Sir, that's a Class A extraterrestrial vessel. We have no idea what their intentions are." "Their intentions," came a voice from everywhere and nowhere, speaking perfect English with what sounded like a British accent, "are to retrieve our children." Everyone froze. The voice seemed to come from the air itself, warm and melodious and definitely not human. "We are the keepers," the voice continued. "We mean no harm to your species. We have come only for our young." A beam of light descended from the ship, and two figures materialized in Jake's front yard. They were clearly the adult versions of his three houseguests, but where the babies were cute and harmless, these beings were magnificent and slightly terrifying. 8 feet tall, with scales that shifted like oil on water and eyes that held the weight of stars. "I am Zara," the larger one said, her voice carrying the same musical quality as the baby's chirps. "This is Corvin. We are the parents of the 3 younglings you have been caring for." Jake swallowed hard. "Look, I can explain." "No explanation is necessary," Corvin interrupted, his voice deeper but no less melodious. "We have been monitoring the situation. We know what you have done." The 3 little ones suddenly broke free from Jake's legs and bounded toward their parents, chirping excitedly. But instead of running into their arms, they stopped halfway and turned back to Jake, making urgent sounds. "They're telling us about you," Zara said, tilting her head. "It's about how you found them, injured and alone. How you cared for them despite your fear." "I wasn't scared," Jake lied. "You were terrified," Corvin said. "Not unkindly. But you acted with compassion nonetheless. This is unexpected." "Unexpected how?" Agent Torres interjected, her weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. "What do you mean?" "We have observed your species for some time," Zara explained. "We know you to be aggressive, territorial, quick to destroy what you do not understand." "Hey now," Jake said, bristling. "We're not all bad." "No," Corvin agreed, studying Jake with those ancient eyes. "Apparently not. You have treated our children as if they were your own. You have protected them, taught them, cared for them. This is not the behavior we expected from humans." Pip suddenly broke away from the group and ran back to Jake, climbing up his leg and settling on his shoulder. It chirped something urgent to its parents. "It says," Zara paused, looking surprised. "It says you are their Earth Father, that you belong to them as much as they belong to you." Jake felt his throat tighten. "Look, I know they're your kids and I know you want them back. I'm not trying to keep them from you. I just want to make sure they're okay." "You would let them go?" Corvin asked. "Even though it would cause you pain?" "They're not mine," Jake said quietly. "They never were. I was just watching them until you came home." The 2 alien parents exchanged a look that somehow conveyed an entire conversation. Then Zara stepped forward and did something that made Agent Torres raise her weapon and the soldiers tense. She placed one large, scaled hand on Jake's shoulder. "Perhaps," she said softly, "we have much to learn from your species after all." Within 6 hours, Jake's quiet ranch had become the center of what news outlets were calling the Montana incident. Military vehicles surrounded the property, helicopters circled overhead, and someone had set up a command tent in his north pasture. The alien ship still hovered serenely above it all, occasionally pulsing with soft light that made the cattle nervous. "This is insane," Jake muttered, watching through his kitchen window as reporters tried to get past military checkpoints. "Yesterday, my biggest problem was a broken fence gate. Now I'm ground zero for first contact." "You're handling it well," Martha said, calmly serving tea to 2 8-foot-tall aliens at Jake's kitchen table. "More cookies, dear?" she asked Zara, who accepted them graciously. Your Martha grandmother makes excellent nutrition circles, Corvin said, struggling slightly with the English words. Our offspring have described her cooking with great enthusiasm. The three young ones were sprawled across Jake's living room floor, playing what appeared to be a complex game involving holographic projections and quantum mathematics. They seemed utterly unconcerned by the military presence outside. Mr. Holbrook, Agent Torres said, bursting through the door with a harried expression, I need you to convince your guests to come with us. The Secretary of Defense is flying in from Washington, and he wants to discuss terms. Terms for what? Jake asked suspiciously. For the peaceful resolution of this situation. We need to establish diplomatic protocols, study their technology, understand their intentions. Their intentions, Zara interrupted coldly, are to collect our children and leave your planet in peace. With respect, Agent Torres said, that's not going to happen, not without extensive negotiations. Negotiations? Corvin's voice carried a dangerous edge. You speak as if you have something we want. You're in our airspace, Agent Torres said. On our soil. We have rights. You have, Zara said, rising to her full height, 3 of our children. That is all that matters to us. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jake could feel the tension building, and he didn't like where this was heading. Now hold on, he said, standing up. Everyone just calm down for a minute. Mr. Holbrook, Agent Torres said, please step away from the hostile extraterrestrials. Hostile? Jake laughed. Lady, the only hostile thing in this room is your attitude. These folks have been nothing but polite, even when you're treating them like criminals. They're not criminals, Agent Torres said. They're aliens. We don't know what they're capable of. I know what they're capable of, Jake said firmly. I've lived with their kids for 2 weeks. I've watched them fix my electronics, organize my books, and teach my cattle basic mathematics. They're not here to hurt anyone. Dad, Jake is correct, Pip suddenly piped up, having abandoned the game to climb onto Jake's lap. We are peaceful. We only want to go home. But we also want to stay with Dad, Jake was added, joining its sibling. Cannot do both, Buzz said sadly. Is impossible. The room fell silent. Jake looked down at the 3 creatures who had somehow become the center of his world, then up at their parents, who were watching him with expressions he couldn't read. What if, he said slowly, it wasn't impossible? What do you mean? Zara asked. I mean, what if we figured out a way for them to have both? Their real family and their Earth family? Jake looked around the room. What if instead of this being a problem, it was an opportunity? Agent Torres frowned. What kind of opportunity? The kind where nobody has to lose anything, Jake said. Where maybe we all gain something instead. You would share custody? Corvin asked, his voice carrying a note of wonder. I'd share anything if it meant keeping them safe and happy, Jake said. That's what family does. Zara and Corvin exchanged another one of their silent conversations. Then Zara smiled, an expression that transformed her entire face. Perhaps, she said, we should discuss this further, away from those who would study us like specimens. Agent Torres started to protest, but Jake held up a hand. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd dealt with stubborn cattle and difficult neighbors for decades. We're going to sit down like civilized beings and work this out. Anyone who can't handle that can wait outside. You don't have the authority, Agent Torres began. On my property, I have all the authority I need, Jake said. And unless you want to explain to your Secretary of Defense why you started an interplanetary war in a Montana kitchen, I suggest you start being part of the solution. Agent Torres stared at him for a long moment, then holstered her weapon and sat down. Fine, she said. Let's talk. 6 months later, Jake stood in his front yard watching a group of human children play quantum hopscotch with 3 young aliens while their parents discussed interdimensional agriculture techniques. His quiet ranch had become the unofficial headquarters for the Human Keeper Cultural Exchange Program, and he still wasn't entirely sure how that had happened. "Dad, Jake," Pip called, bouncing over with a holographic butterfly perched on its head. "Can we show the Earth children how to make light pictures?" "As long as you don't accidentally open any portals to other dimensions," Jake said. "Martha's still finding alien fruit in her garden from last time." "That was an accident," Wiz protested, joining them. "The physics were very complicated." "Everything's complicated with you three," Jake said, but his tone was fond. "Go on, just keep it small scale." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of changes. The initial standoff had resolved when Jake had essentially told both governments, human and alien, that they could work together or find somewhere else to have their diplomatic crisis. The Keepers had established a small outpost on his ranch, disguised as an agricultural research facility for the benefit of curious neighbors. The three younglings split their time between Earth and their home world, but Jake's ranch remained their primary residence. "It's remarkable," Agent Torres said, approaching with a tablet full of reports. She'd been assigned as the permanent human liaison, a job that had apparently transformed her from a suspicious government agent into something resembling a proud aunt. The advances in technology, agriculture, medicine, all because you couldn't let 3 lost babies stay lost. "I didn't do anything special," Jake protested. "I just fed them and made sure they didn't break anything important." "You loved them," Martha said, emerging from the house with a pitcher of lemonade and what appeared to be a glowing blue beverage that the aliens preferred. "That's plenty special." "Martha, grandmother is correct," Zara said, materializing beside them with that unsettling way the Keepers had of moving silently. "Love is the rarest and most powerful force in the universe. It transcends species, planetary boundaries, even dimensions." "You're being dramatic," Jake said, but he was smiling. "They're just kids." "They are the future," Corvin added, joining the group. "Both of our species. The first generation to grow up truly knowing both worlds." Jake watched as Buzz attempted to teach a human child how to levitate a flower, while Pip and Wiz provided commentary that somehow managed to be both educational and completely incomprehensible. The human children were taking it all in stride the way kids did, accepting magic and science fiction as just another part of their expanding world. "You know what the best part is?" Jake said, settling into his porch chair with a cup of coffee. "They're normal. As normal as interdimensional aliens raised by a Montana rancher can be anyway. They fight over who gets the last cookie, they leave their toys everywhere, and they still try to stay up past bedtime." "Some things are universal," Agent Torres agreed. "Though I have to ask, are you sure you're okay with all this? Your life has changed pretty dramatically." Jake looked around at his property, which now hosted a small alien village, a government research facility, and a steady stream of visitors from across the galaxy. His cattle had learned to ignore flying vehicles, his garden produced vegetables that didn't exist on Earth, and he'd somehow become the go-to expert on interspecies child rearing. "You know what I used to do with my evenings?" he said. "Sit on this porch, drink beer, and talk to my cows. Now I help with homework that involves calculating the orbital mechanics of parallel dimensions, mediate disputes between species, and teach alien children how to play baseball." "And?" Martha prompted. "And I wouldn't trade it for anything," Jake said. "These kids gave me a purpose I didn't know I was missing. They made me part of something bigger than myself." "Dad, Jake." All 3 creatures called in unison, racing toward the porch with their human playmates trailing behind. "Come see what we made." Jake stood up, brushing off his hands. "What am I about to be impressed by now?" "We made a friendship garden," Buzz announced proudly, "with flowers from 7 different planets." "And they sing," Pip added. "All in harmony." "The Earth children helped," Wiz said generously. "They have very good ideas about color arrangement." Jake followed the excited group to the side yard, where they'd apparently created a small botanical miracle. Flowers and colors that had no names swayed in patterns that defied physics, creating music that sounded like pure joy. The human children were beaming with pride, while the alien younglings practically vibrated with excitement. It's beautiful, Jake said. And meant it. You all did amazing work. We're going to plant one at the real home too, Pip said, leaning against Jake's leg. So both families can enjoy it. Both families, Jake repeated, looking around at the strange, wonderful chaos his life had become. Yeah, I like the sound of that. As the sun set over the ranch, Jake stood surrounded by the strangest family in the galaxy, and realized that sometimes the best things in life really did fall out of the sky and land in your barn. You just had to be brave enough to open the door when they knocked. Hey Dad, Jake, Buzz said, tugging on his sleeve. What's for dinner? Well, Jake said, grinning, I was thinking we could try that recipe your mom gave me. The one that involves ingredients from 3 different solar systems. Can we help cook? Wiz asked. Can Martha grandmother make her special bread? Pip added. Can the Earth children stay for dinner? All 3 chorused. Jake looked around at his extraordinary family and laughed. Why not? It's not like things could get any weirder around here. Famous last words, he thought, but he wouldn't have it any other way.